You make a bunch of noise out here, so they have peace and quiet in here. Because there's no better sound than the squeak-free guarantee from Advantech Subflooring and Advantech Subfloor Adhesive.
Welcome to the UnBuild It podcast. I'm Jake Bruton, and today we have a special guest on the podcast that I'm not going to announce yet. I'm going to ask him to stay quiet. So if you're watching, you've figured out who it is already, but he's going to be quiet. So if you're just listening and you haven't read the description yet, you're going to get to hear Peter's voice.
Hi there.
Yep. And we're going to talk kind of about water quality, but I wanted to start the discussion from, well, you're going to know it's Eric Aune now that I said water, and he's been on the podcast recently. So I can just say it's Eric.
Our mystery guest
I
is
tried
already
to bury the
revealed.
lead, but okay.
I like his shirt, too. Very nice.
I should have wore the helmet so you couldn't see me, the Stig.
Yeah. So we're just sitting here and we're talking about all the different ways that water gets to your house, knowing whether or not the water is any good, what to do if the water's not good, and all the different things that literally just have to do not with like heating it once it gets into your house or how to deal with it once it gets distributed once inside your house, just like the idea of we want water, potable water inside of our house, and we want to know it's safe, and if it's not safe, we want to deal with those sorts of things. So I think you guys live in Minnesota, but you're in a municipality even though you're kind of rural, right?
We have well water at our house.
Okay.
Oh.
We're just outside of town where they've got city water supply, municipal supply.
You're on city water, right, Peter?
Nope.
Okay, what are you on?
We're on a well system.
You're on a well even though you have a sprinkler system? How the hell does that work?
Yeah, so
Peter's
my wife
house
and I,
is sprinkled.
The lawn or the house?
The house.
both.
For fire suppression.
Both.
It's
Yeah, fire
irrigated with
suppression.
a system, and then it's sprinklers in every living space.
Yeah,
On
it's
a
completely doable.
I know, it just, to me, it's
Well,
unheard of.
But the wells service the Brookdale Assisted Living Facility as well as our entire
Yes,
neighborhood.
you heard that.
Which is
Peter
tricky.
just admitted that he lives in an assisted living facility.
That's not
He's
what I said.
that old.
See, the problem is you don't have a hearing problem. You have a listening
Dude,
problem.
It sounds to me like you have what we might consider like a district.
It's basically a district system
System.
for about the equivalency of 50 homes.
Sure.
Yeah. But it does lead to a lot of complication, and there are particular concerns about water quality and how often it gets tested, because these are really big well systems. We only have 2 wells to service the 50
Wow.
homes. Yeah.
And I'm on city water, but I grew up on water district, public water too, as well. That was just like county water system. I've never lived on well water, but I have plenty of family members that are on well water. And at one point, we used to go to a hunting cabin that had a tank, and they hauled water. And
So-
I thought that was the most bizarre thing in the history of the world, too.
I'd like to add that my mother grew up in a house in Chrisfield, Maryland, which was below sea level. The house was actually below sea level, so the only water they got was rainwater collection off their tin roof, and if my grandpa brought another water supply home in the back of his truck. So my mother, even when she had plenty of water, she had a system for washing dishes that was like staged. Like, this is the really dirty water, and then this is the slightly dirty water, then there's the rinse water, and then there's the final rinse water, and she would go through this process.
That's the whole don't throw the baby
And
out with the bathwater
Yeah.
And he
scenario.
gets disappointed when we make jokes about how old he is. But he tells stories like that somehow.
It was
See,
about his grandparents and his mother.
I know, but his grandparents
Eric,
are
I
old
think
enough that
you
that-
need to be on every podcast, even if you're just like adult
Don't
supervision
defend
for
him.
these guys.
I don't.
Lordy.
Well,
So-
you bring up wells, you bring up municipality. There's a lot of different water sources, though. For municipal purposes, they can come from literally anywhere you weren't looking, right? Watershed.
Anywhere you weren't looking.
Yeah,
I love that.
You know, like drilled wells is the most common. So most municipal water supply comes from a drilled well. Regardless of whether it's a small area it's serving, they're typically serving small areas. These well houses are placed throughout communities. So there's multiple in single municipalities. Not every municipal water supply has a water tower. So they might be pumping direct from a pump house, a well, right out of the ground. They might utilize water towers to increase pressure to expand the delivery. But I've got customers that receive their water from the city, but it's originating at the Mississippi River in Minnesota.
In Brattleboro, we were reservoir.
Yeah,
an
reservoirs.
open reservoir.
Reservoir in much of the United States is one of the most common outside of drilled wells. Rainwater collection is one more privatized way. And just groundwater of various sorts, wetlands, things like that. So there's a lot of different water sources. All of it would require some sort of treating, though.
So it's important to note that, like, while we said well water for like where you get your water, we also said well water for municipal water, and like immediately it's like, okay, so there's no like immediate distinction for like, oh well, the municipal water is immediately cleaner than anybody else's water.
Well,
there are testing standards that exist for that water that might not exist for your house water.
Right, and Peter probably knows infinitely more about this than I do, but I know the basics of it are based off population. So if the municipality is supplying water, that treatment process, the chemicals in which they're introducing per, grams per liter, all these kind of crazy measurements that they have to go, what they're delivering is based off of, population. They hit a threshold, they have to now increase the treatment.
They have to now care about whether or not people croak.
Well, none of it's raw, and it's interesting you kind of make that distinction between municipality. Well, I've talked about it, you could pull them right out of reservoirs or rivers. The reality is like a municipal water supply doesn't just like exist. It has to start somewhere, and it starts just like we have a private well at our house in central Minnesota, right? It's just a smaller version of that same thing, but serving one house instead of many thousands, let's say.
So once we get water to the house, you've described your business as dealing with existing customers, and let's say they call you and say, yeah, we're on city water, but we have concerns about the water quality.
Yeah.
And then they turn to you and say, hey, Eric, what can we do to improve the water quality at our house?
Most of the time what we're dealing with in the upper Midwest is not scale, which is very common for you where you're at. I'm not sure about your water quality. Maybe alkalinity might be a higher concern, hardness, things like that.
Hardness is
hardness is what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with mitigating high levels of calcium and magnesium. That's what's making the water hard. We have a lot of private wells are being treated for iron. We're removing iron because that's what makes that red staining on the sidewalk. If your sprinklers hit it, that's what, coloration in the plumbing fixtures, things like that. It's less than ideal, right? It also adds taste and odor to the water. So that's the typical, we're dealing with calcium, magnesium, and iron where I'm at. And we're doing that typically with ion exchange systems. So a traditional brine-based water softener using a inorganic type of resin that's attracting those minerals. We're using the brine from the salt to clean those off and just
a huge bath tank that has to be replenished.
Yeah.
And is that like a component based, like you have two parts of that system that you go and then install it, or is it a one part system? Is it off the shelf? Is it plug and play?
Well, it's usually mini. It can be mini or just one, but it's piece by piece based off of what we're treating. So we put in a traditional water softener to address the hardness, and that's going to remove the calcium and magnesium. That's the brine-based system. That's separate from a iron filter. We call them iron filters, but they very much look like a water softener. That has just a different media inside of it, doesn't use salt, right? And we can do things like need to remove tannins or just taste and odor. Those are things like granular activated carbon, like your carbon filters, canister filters. We can do a whole home version of that with a more like a softener looking device. All in the same, just very much smaller scale, not utilizing injection of chemicals like dosing of chlorines and fluorides, things like that municipalities are doing. But we're trying to achieve more or less the same end goal as far as safe, cleaner water, more desirable water. We're just not typically doing it with chemicals.
But you skipped over one of the most respectful lectures I've ever been given, which was one that you gave me about you can't just put things on the system unless you know what you're going after.
Yeah. So
which really was a respectful lecture that Eric gave me, and it was like a 15-minute lecture about we're not just adding things to the system unless we know that there's a problem.
So you're tuning based upon testing
trust,
results?
Trust but verify. Like if we think we have a problem, that's fine, but we're going to test it. So how do we go about testing for water quality?
Well, you could do a home test kit. There's available online. You can go on Amazon and just buy a water test kit, right? And under certain, maybe you just kind of use your own judgment. If it has a major manufacturer's name on it, probably reliable. See where that's going to be sent in if it goes.
So, like, if it says Ford or Chevy.
Yes.
Okay.
Ford or Chevy. Yeah.
I'm just thinking.
I'm thinking more along the lines of plumbing equipment, like Watts is a big name. In
Who knew that he was thinking about plumbing equipment rather than automobiles?
That's why I asked.
But you could also consult. You can talk to your municipality. They have to give you results on their water samples.
I didn't know he was going to say trust the government.
I didn't say trust the government. I said you could demand of the government to give you the source of material that they're required to give you.
Wait, we're going to back up real quick. I have not been able to stop thinking about it until someone said it. Since someone said it like 3 weeks ago in front of me, it's not treason unless you lose.
Okay.
It's completely off topic.
These little gems that just
I know.
appear out of
There's
nowhere.
so many of them.
Just let that sit with you. It's not treason unless you lose.
You know, a lot of major universities local near you will do water testing. And, I mean, boy, I tell you, I've sent water tests into the University of Minnesota, in the Twin Cities campus. And the amount of boxes you can check for them to test, I don't even understand what nearly most of those are. Like, I know the basics of what we're looking for. High levels of nitrates, things like, because I live in a farming country, things that are very obviously a concern where you're immediately at. One big topic in this conversation nationwide are the PFAS, or the forever chemicals, and how to filter those out. We're just learning about that completely. Honest, I'm not going to say I have a high level of knowledge on how to treat that, but that is the next, we're aware of it more than ever, and we need to move forward.
And we're talking about not parts per million, but parts per billion.
Yeah.
That's what makes it,
is that
really
different
crazy.
than microplastics?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Okay. I'm unfamiliar with both of them, so I have to be educated.
Forever chemicals are used in the manufacturing process. Think of things, and this is not all of them. There are literally thousands of them. But the most common would be, and for us to comprehend, would be things like waterproofing chemicals.
Yeah.
Think of
Teflon systems.
Yeah, I don't want to throw names on there, but think of your favorite boots that are totally waterproof, and like, how did they make them that way? Or your rain jacket that doesn't have a membrane like visible on it. It's some kind of chemical that they put on it, and those are leaching into the ground source water supplies. They're in lakes, they're in streams, they're in wells that are being drilled that we're pulling our water out of.
Cross-country skiing, they use a super slippery material that's PFAS-based. It's used in a lot of things to make things, slippery, non-stick. Yeah.
All I'm hearing is Christmas Vacation, a non-Euclidean cereal varnish.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not currently testing for those in any way that I can test for them out in the field. I have a very basic water quality test kit that allows me to look for levels of calcium, magnesium, the hardness, the TDS, or the total dissolved solids. That's what we're testing for. And then we're testing for iron and tannins, which is pretty basic, because if you have tannins and it's a concern, and tannins are what basically give the water a color. And so, I don't necessarily need to test for that, because if it's present, it's visible. But that's what we're doing. So you asked how you can test. How do you check? You can send it, take water samples, raw water samples, whether you're getting your water from the city or it's coming out of your own private well. You can put it in the proper type of container, not typically like a water bottle that we're, dumping out and filling. They typically are plastic, simply because they're not breakable, but they're not, they're the BPA free, things like that. You don't need a very much quantity. You can send those to various places. You can buy your own. You can contact the source. A lot of companies that sell water conditioning equipment offer this service as well.
Test it so that we can justify selling you the equipment.
Right, but you brought up like
True.
our conversation about knowing what you have. Like, I don't have an analogy to apply to this, but I'll tell you, like, you don't need to treat something that you don't for something that you don't have, right?
Yeah.
I can go to my plumbing supplier, I could go to a home center, I can see those filters I brought up a minute ago, the carbon filters. The package says it removes taste and odor. Well, that's great, and if I just put one in, is it going to remove taste and odor if I don't have taste? Like, what, you know, like, why would I put it in if I didn't need it?
Yeah.
And if I had a scale problem, but it wasn't a hardness issue, I want to remove the elements that are making that scale present. I want to filter for that. I want to treat the water for that. I don't need to remove iron if I have a scale problem. So we're applying the technology or the devices based off of what is truly there. And it's not a guess. And in fact, it's not a guess in so much that we have a neighbor in our neighbor. There's 15 houses on this horseshoe-shaped road I live on. Rural,
What's the name of the street?
when it's rural, it's all
Almost.
it's
I
all
almost had
it's
it.
you know all private wells. And one of our longtime family friends, they've lived there the same length of time that we have, nearly 25 years, and they've had like 4 wells drilled on their property because the first one wasn't any better apparently than the last one. They just stuck with it because they were stuck with it. Their water, it looks like coffee coming out of the well. My water, you could bottle it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
We live 600 yards from each other.
Yeah.
So we're pulling from the same aquifer. Everything about it really is the same, but just happens to be where they're pulling their water from. And my point being is this. I've got 15 houses in my neighborhood. Judging off of my house, I just need a softener. If any one of them were to call me, I could just say, well, you just need a softener. That's all I need.
Yeah.
Boy, if I said that to my neighbor, he'd say, well, that's all it's going to take to fix this problem because the water's as clear as this black microphone, you know? So
Yeah.
obviously we need different equipment to treat that.
I had zero experience with soft water until we did a project for a couple, and we had done a bunch of line drains where we did the line drain at the entrance to the shower, and the floor sloped to the line drain, so like it was the last line of defense. If the water
Line drains. The
like
linear drain.
yeah, linear drain.
Yeah, okay.
And I had done maybe 10 of them, and I had done the majority of those 10 for assisted living facilities. So not clients that were conscious about where they were splashing water. And we had no issues whatsoever. And it was a affluent older couple that hired us to do the shower, and he was out of town when we finished the bathroom, and she was there, and 4 or 5 days after we finished the job, he got back into town and he showered, and he called and said, the water's running out onto the floor. And I was like, she's been there for 3 or 4 days. Surely she has used the shower. Like, we ran the water, but I didn't stand in the shower and splash around.
Yeah.
I turned the water on and then like ducked out and shut the door. Surely she showered. And so I called her and said, hey, Urban just called me. I just said his name. Urban just called me and
I
said,
thought his name was Shirley.
yeah, Shirley. He just called and said that the shower's leaking and there's like a gallon of water out on the floor. And she said, okay, well, I've showered 3 times and nothing's happened. And so I said, okay, let me think about it and I'll come over. And I went over and I talked to him about it, and he said, no, it just ran out onto the floor. And so then I said, okay, call me if it does it again. Like, let's see if it was some sort of fluke or something. And the next day, he called and said it ran out on the floor again. And I said, okay, has Linda showered since then? I already said their name, so we're full in. And he said, yeah, she showered this morning and it didn't leak. And I said, okay, it's something he's doing and not
bizarre.
her. And I called back like 20 minutes later and I said, I need you to watch your husband take a shower. Because it's something that he's doing
now
that you're
we know
not.
their names and
Yes.
they watch each other
And
shower.
it's their kink.
She thinks it's hilarious. And she called me the next morning while he was still in the shower. And she said,
FaceTime.
he's using 1/3 of a cup of shampoo while he washes his hair. He is 65 years old. He buys his own shampoo. I had no idea that he doesn't know how much is an appropriate amount of shampoo. He was creating enough suds that he was breaking the surface tension on the top of the drain, and because they had a water softener, it was very easy to contribute to the surface tension on that, and it was just gushing across. And she said, literally, we cleaned it all up, and she put him back in the shower, and she put the appropriate amount of shampoo in his hand.
Which is like a
and
dime,
it never,
maybe?
and yeah, it's a cap full of my little water bottle, and it never happened again.
I thought you were going to complete this by saying, and he's bald.
Yeah, he's completely bald. He just likes the way shampoo feels on his head. No, but like that was my first experience, and I still, like 5 years later, didn't understand. Like I knew that it was more slick, but I've never like actually felt softened water because I've never lived in a house like that. And recently I stayed in a fancy hotel, and after I was in the shower for like 5 minutes, I was like, I feel greasy.
Yeah.
What in the heck is wrong with their water? And I was like,
It's
they have
soft.
softened water.
Yeah.
That's what it's like. And I was grossed out. And I was like, I don't ever want softened water now.
Well, wait a minute. I think that's terrible.
I didn't
way of
like it.
thinking.
I didn't
My
like it at
customers
all.
love it.
I didn't like it at all.
Well, there's a lot of people that might have a preference one way or another, right? I think most people would prefer to have it softened. If they've had soft water, they realize like how much they would prefer it over hard water. There are some creature benefits regardless of your preferences.
Sure.
Okay. Your plumbing fixtures, your faucets, the aerators, the piping, all that, everything water is in contact with, when it's conditioned, whether it's to remove scale or to soften it because you've got high levels of calcium, magnesium, iron, things like that. Once it's conditioned, it's going to benefit your plumbing system. There are other creature benefits too, where like this whole movement toward washing clothes with cold water to save energy. Soaps of all types of detergents, whether it's a bar soap you're using to clean your skin, or it's detergent to clean clothing or your dishes, those are all optimized to work with conditioned water. They just are. They might work better with cold than they ever did before, but they all will work better with less minerals in the water. Hands down, it's a fact. And so you have better performance on things, appliances like clothes washers,
Sounds to me like
dishwashers,
big water softeners got their
big
hooks.
water, yeah.
Yeah, but
Got their hooks
it's
in there.
but it is a fact. You can't deny it. And also, under a lot of conditions where water is not treated, you look at things like tank water heaters. Tank water heaters, think of it no other way as a giant pipe where the velocity is slowed way down, and you've got this science experiment happening inside of it. When you heat water, its density changes, its minerals want to pull apart from each other, start moving around, cling to other things because ion exchange, all these things are happening. And you then, with that slow velocity, minerals, untreated water, it's dropping to the bottom, creating sediment on the bottom of the tank. If you treat that, you're removing that, whether it's literal sediment or sediment byproduct of that heating the water, things like that, because of minerals. If you're removing that, now you're prolonging the life of that one particular appliance, your tank water heater. Tankless water heaters benefit from it. There's really a lot of benefits from it. There's some downfalls to it though too.
But I think
such as
waste. When you're doing ion exchange with brine systems, flushing media beds with an iron filter with a water softener. Anytime you have to clean something, and you're typically doing that by using more water and sending it strictly just down the drain. Raw water that's not being used for any other purpose than maintaining that equipment. It's all done automatic, and a lot of times these pieces of equipment aren't set up properly, so then you can further the amount of waste that they produce.
But Jake, is it possible that he was in an area where the water is too soft? Because
it is. So
that's when it starts to feel greasy.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a balancing point
in Austin, Texas.
Well, but it's not all the same. So there are times in which we install equipment in our customers' homes, and maybe its capacity is slightly higher than what they truly end up using. Like they tell you what they use, or they've got this giant house, but maybe you forget that there's only 2 people, so they're not using even nearly the capacity you had to size this equipment on, because they're not always going to be the only people living there, that kind of thing. We typically size things to handle what could happen, like how many bathrooms are in the house versus there's only 2 of us. That kind of thing. And so what can happen is it can create conditions where it's a little on the too soft side, for sure. And then if you've just not ever experienced it, you're going to notice, and it might just be a little more amplified.
I know we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, do we have any sense of the relationship between all these dissolved materials in water and taste? Like, I know people that say the water here just tastes lousy. And I know the water's clean, but I don't know how to evaluate or change the taste with either taking things out or putting things in.
So I don't have any experience with putting things in. First of all, my license demands of me to protect water supply, whether it's private or municipal. I don't have any type of accreditation to add chemicals to things. Like, it's just not in my, the restriction of my license. I can tell you that separating those and removing them changes the taste of water, as you obviously know. But typically, people are finding just very simple devices like carbon filters to remove taste and odor, to be pleasant. You can go even steps further to reduce stuff in your water, like reverse osmosis, things like that. If that's what you're kind of getting at, like how do you treat for that?
I wasn't sure whether when people say this water tastes good,
Peter's doing air quotes on the podcast for those of you just listening.
Whether water that tastes good is one where almost everything has been reviewed and it's pH 7 and that's what tastes good, or whether a better taste is something related to slightly elevated levels of certain things, and I just don't know.
Or if it's mineral water like Eric's drinking today.
Yeah.
A lot of times what we would call like a mineral water, that's a manufactured, right? But if you're not fully removing, so it's a personal thing.
Yeah.
I guess is what I should get at. I like water I don't like reverse osmosis filtered water, personally.
Interesting.
I know that it's clean. I know that it's safer to drink than most water, really.
Yeah.
But
Eric
I just
likes
don't.
his water with grape Kool-Aid in it.
Yeah. I just don't. Yeah. A little bit of whiskey.
Some whiskey.
Oh.
No. But I just prefer it to have some minerals because I do like the taste of those.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
They
but
come
I wasn't
natural
sure.
in the water,
Yeah.
I should say.
I like whatever I'm used to.
Yeah, well, no,
I noticed that when I'm
you're
not
not
at
unlike
home-
everyone else, though. To be honest with you.
So, like, my wife bought because I haven't put in the filtration system that you guided me to, that I haven't installed yet. My wife bought a countertop system from Berkey that's a charcoal filter.
Yeah.
That we fill up multiple times a day, and I notice when it runs out and I fill up from the tap, it tastes different and I don't enjoy it as much. Or when I travel and I end up drinking out of bottles, I don't like it as much.
We use a British system that you buy from the grocery store, and the water that is treated that way definitely tastes better than our well water. But for 22 years we lived in Brattleboro, which was an open reservoir, and I thought that water tasted great.
With all the bird poop and everything in it.
I don't want to elaborate on what poops in the reservoir, but
I have a question
at least
for you.
Fish.
At least. I have a question for you that my 17-year-old asked. He called and asked me if there was a dead body in a swimming pool, would you jump in that swimming pool and swim in it? Honestly, would you?
no.
Okay. You swim in the ocean. There's got to be dead bodies in the ocean. I think it's a ratio question.
Proximity. It's a proximity thing.
He said, I think it's a ratio question, your tolerance for dead body to water amount.
Yeah.
Are you worried about your oldest son?
No, I think we have the exact same sense of humor, actually.
Oh, well,
that's why I'm not worried.
That would make me worry quite a bit if I learned that your son was a lot like you.
He doesn't live with them full time, so he's got a chance.
There's a temperance there.
There's a chance.
He gets to...
But I thought it was an amazing question to just go out of nowhere. Like, oh, we would be uncomfortable with a dead body in a pool, but we all get in the ocean, and there's got to be dead bodies floating around in the ocean.
Real quick. Municipal water supply brought up that they can bring it out of the river, like in the Mississippi, for most of the city of Minneapolis. You know how they filter that water? Sand. Literally. The earth.
Just sand.
They've built these water filtration systems back in the early 1900s, and they're still in use today, and they're filtering water, pumping it into reservoirs in the ground. No. I don't think that they do, to be honest. I could be wrong. I'm sure somebody watching this is going to tell me he's totally wrong.
We're going to hear from the water
We don't read
department.
the comments.
But they're literally through a series of filtration systems way deep into the ground that have been under roof and behind block walls and used for literally over 100 years. They're pulling water in from the river, pushing it through these filtration ponds inside, and they're using sand. So you can use a filter on your countertop, or you can run it through a pitcher, which is carbon. It's a carbon filter.
Or you can move to Minneapolis.
You can move to Minneapolis, and the river water is filtered with sand, and it's pretty good.
The well water near my house filters through limestone.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
We need to
Interesting.
have Eric back on a regular basis. Yeah.
I mean,
I think plumbing topics
do we have
are
to pay
very
him? Because if not, we should have
very
him on.
interesting.
well, I think if we were going to pay him, we should have talked that beforehand.
So I'm not so well.
What's done is done. You don't negotiate after the fact.
Well, then I guess I get to start making jokes about Jake, maybe Steve, but not
Maybe.
Peter.
It's pretty easy pickings.
Okay, gentlemen,
Thanks, Eric.
thank you for joining me today. Eric, thank you for sitting in yet again.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Until next time, have a good day.
Bye.